my name is Tony. In the early 70s, on a Monday night after the news at 10, ITV, one of the only 3 terrestrial TV channels we had at the time, would broadcast a horror film. Somehow, probably through a campaign of obnoxiousness and belligerence, I persuaded my parents to let me stay up to watch on what was a school night. It would end around midnight, at which point the national anthem would play, and all TV would shut down until the mid-morning of the following day. The screen would shrink to a little white dot, and the TV speaker would make a high-pitched droning flatline sound, like entertainment had died on the operating table. Teenage Wasteland? Fuck yeah, and then some. Anyway, the point, yes, there is one. This is how I first became aware of the output of Hammer Studios and my gateway to that world. And this is how I came to see The Curse of Frankenstein, a life-changing experience, after which I never looked back, only down, as I descended into a pit of blood, gut, shock, spills, thrills, violence, cleavage, and lavish debauchery. Great! This was the studio's first film in colour.
Not just any colour, glorious Eastman colour.
And the one that set out their stall, the foundation for the next 2 decades of film production. It was a game changer, a new breed of horror flick that bravely decided to show more gore, guts and grue than any other in the past. Yep, the times they were a-changing, and most British critics were appalled, clutching their pearls, breathless with offence, incensed by the obscenity they were forced to review. Bunch of snotty elitist wussies. Yeah, they were around back then as well. Don't go thinking pompous, self-righteous, killjoy snowflakery is anything new. The jackbooters have always been poncing around. Audiences, though, the true arbiters of public taste, for better or worse, lapped it up, and The Curse of Frankenstein was a worldwide hit, making more than 70 times its estimated £65,000 budget. There's gold in them thar gizzards, matey. Screenwriter Jimmy Sangster looked at Mary Shelley's Gothic template and distilled it down into a more compact and surgical vision, excising most of its darkly romantic leanings and philosophical eye on Promethean metaphors. Instead, the emphasis became one of twisted scientific obsession and the legwork of sourcing body parts to make a patchwork living dead composite that runs amok. Terence Fisher's unflinching direction chronicles events with low-level elegance and sporadic flourishes of black humour. Film kicks off with an elderly priest, Alex Gallia, visiting a condemned man in a Swiss jail. The man is Baron Victor Frankenstein, Peter Cushing, who is an hour away from being executed for murder. He summoned the priest not for religious reasons, but because people believe in what priests tell them. 1,000 choir boys can attest to that. If he convinces the priest of the truth of his story, then he may be in with a chance. It's a sly comment on a society that readily believes in a ghost impregnated a virgin and gave us the Son of God, but spin him a yarn of science and fact and you're off to the guillotine, laddie. So Vic tells his tale, and the core of the film is in flashback. Young Victor Frankenstein, Melvin Hayes, inherits the Frankenstein lands and fortune on the death of his mother. After the funeral, Aunt Sophia, Noel Hood, and a young daughter Elizabeth, Sally Walsh, are told by Victor that he will continue to honour the financial support given to them by his departed mum. There's a sort of deal whereby Elizabeth will one day marry Victor. The first thing Vic does is employ a learned science teacher, Paul Kremper, Robert Urquhart, as a live-in mentor and tutor. Be warned, when we first see Paul, he's balancing on his head the biggest, most unstable and garish-looking top hat this side of a Lewis Carroll convention in a nut house. That hat is the most disturbing article on show until the creature rocks up. Truly a motherfucker of a hat. Traumatizing. Surprised the BBFC didn't order cuts. The two get on well enough, despite aging incompatibly, with Vic looking older than Paul, despite Paul being aged with makeup. Their experiments with electricity, bubbling chemicals in what look like ancient slush puppy machines, and flotation tanks resurrects a dead dog. Paul wants to submit a paper to some science convention, but Vic has other ideas. He wants to hold off until he has taken the next step, a step which involves building a human being from scratch. Paul's a bit dubious about this, but tags along anyway to cut down the hanging corpse of a highwayman. As the basis for their jigsaw man. The crows have gotten to the head, so Vic severs it and dumps it in a big acid bath. The highwayman's hands are a bit shit also, so Vic furtively shoves off on a secret mission. During his absence, a grown-up Elizabeth Hazel Court arrives, but not just for a visit. No, since her mother has just stiffed it, she's going to marry Vic and stay forever. When Vic turns up, he seems happy enough with the arrangement, but preoccupied with showing Paul what he's come back with. A pair of severed hands from the corpse of a famed sculptor. He bribed a mortician to get them. Suppose one hand greases the other. Paul is suddenly a bit sniffy and moral about this grisly business. He fears the effect it will have on Elizabeth and refuses to help Vic any further. Vic carries on regardless. He also carries on carrying on with French maid Justine, Valerie Gaunt. She's none too pleased about Elizabeth being on the scene and pissing in the chips. She aims to be Baroness Frankenstein and is less than chuffed when Vic disavows her of this pipe dream. Ooh, a woman scorned. We all know what that means. It means she's a woman, and she's scorned. Paul tries to persuade Elizabeth to leave, but she's having none of it. Meanwhile, Vic pops along to the municipal charnel house, lovely place, and collects a pair of eyes. They should at least see him through the week. Vic needs a brain. No, not for himself. His is fine. But he needs one for his creation. Where and how to get the skull contents of a true genius? Vic invites crumbly old scientific luminary Professor Bernstein, Paul Hardmuth, to stay. This pleasant but doddery old buffoon with one foot in the grave and the other on black ice doesn't scream genius to me, but Vic, knows him better, I suppose. After a lovely evening, Vic shows him to his room. On the way, Vic draws Bernstein's attention to a painting. He advises him to step back to get a better view, then shoves him through the handrail. Luckily, the flagstone floor breaks his fall. Not so luckily, it kills him outright. As the old guy has no family, Vic has him interred in his family mausoleum. Later that night, he opens the coffin and takes out his brain. Well, not his brain, Bernstein's. When Paul catches him in the act, Vic's excuse is along the lines of, well, he didn't need it anymore. The two men engage in a tussle, whereby the glass jar in which the brain of Bernstein now resides gets smashed. Still, not to worry, Vic pulls out the glass shards with the tweezers and pops it into the head of his creation. It'll do. Paul once more tries to convince Elizabeth to leave, but she's still having none of it. It's the big day, or night, and during a thunderstorm, Vic tries to breathe life into his creation. Realizing it's going to take two to operate the machinery, he blackmails Paul into helping him. Either he pitches in, or he'll get Elizabeth involved. Whilst he's putting the squeeze on Paul, a bolt of lightning strikes the machinery in the lab, setting it in violent motion. When Vic returns to the lab ahead of Paul, he's confronted by success. Well, in one way, yes. In another, not so much. His creature, Christopher Lee, is living and breathing. Yay! But it turns out he's a 6'5" slab of homicidal roadkill, who instantly tries to strangle Vic to death. Paul intervenes and poleaxes him with a chair. Vic straps the creature down. Paul thinks he needs to be destroyed, but who listens to him? Next day, the lab is trashed and the creature has broken out. Fuck, as they say. Loose in the countryside, the creature encounters and kills an old blind man and his young grandson. Vic and Paul are out hunting him with shotguns. When they run across him, Vic looks like he's going to try reasoning with the brain-damaged monstrosity. Paul, on the other hand, dispenses with the diplomatic approach altogether and blasts half his face off. They bury the corpse. Paul has had a tit full of Vic and leaves. Vic, however, just can't quit on such a spiffing experiment. He exhumes the creature's corpse and hangs it from a hook in his lab. Wonder what he'll do next. Justine is unhappy with Vic. She announces to him that she is pregnant. Vic gallantly replies that anyone from the village could be the father. Yep, that old chestnut. Scorned, a woman scorned. Justine plots her revenge. She waits until Vic has left his lab and sneaks inside for a look-see. Vic knows she's in there and locks the door. Guess who's had some brain surgery, a blast of reanimation, and is up and about again? Yep, hello, handsome. That's the end of Justine and a bun and a oven. Vic and Elizabeth get married. Paul, who was invited, calls around after the ceremony. Vic has something to show him in the lab. I've heard that one before. It's the creature, who after more brain surgery obeys rudimentary verbal commands from Vic, much like I do with my wife. Paul storms from the house to contact the authorities. Vic takes off after him. Elizabeth decides to investigate the laboratory and satisfy her long-standing curiosity. Vic and Paul argue outside until they spot the creature on the roof and Elizabeth also on the roof. Vic goes to the rescue, whipping whipping out his trusty flintlock. Being a crack shot, he fires and hits Elizabeth. Oops, he fires again and wounds the creature, but not enough to stop the creature coming after him. So he uses an oil lamp as a missile. The creature catches fire, then plummets through a skylight into the acid bath. Frying tonight, chaps? Back to the present, and the priest is unconvinced by Vic's story. He'd rather believe in angels, virgin births, burning bushes, water into wine, and speed walking on the surface of Galilee. Paul arrives to see Vic and refuses to back up his account. He leaves with Elizabeth, and Vic is left to his fate as the guillotine is primed for the chop. I wouldn't worry too much. As the saying goes, he'll be back. And he was in a further 4 Frankenstein films. I know it looks dusty and creaky now, but the impact at the time was seismic. The idea of what you could and couldn't show in a horror film was challenged and recalibrated. Taken along with some clever techniques utilising the power of suggestion, it was ensured that things would never be the same. It was the first time Cushing and Lee appeared together on screen. They would partner up a further 21 times. It was the start of the leading and supporting roles the two men would assume for the rest of their lives. They became household names and were never short of work. Okay, so the money was peanuts compared to those big Hollywood salaries, and they did some things they'd probably rather not have done. But their legacies cannot be underestimated. Cushing would play the Baron a further 4 times for Hammer, and no matter what the quality of the films, he was great at it. Never failed to deliver a wholly professional dramatic performance. His mad scientist isn't mad in the traditional sense. He doesn't rant and rave or laugh hysterically, eyes bulging, face contorted. No, none of that. It's alive malarkey. He is meticulous, clipped, charming, smooth and urbane. He is all magnificent obsession and egomania. Everyone else is a fool. No one is quite as clever as he is, and he's only one step removed from God the Creator. Even his failures are successes, and he will continue to do what he does until the world pays recognition and bows down before his genius. Mad, but very composed and cultured about it. Christopher Lee got the gig because of his height and imposing physique and presence. He thought to play the creature as someone whose damaged brain resulted in a lack of fine motor coordination, whose joints and muscles were in a state of atrophy. Phil Leakey's facial makeup was based on severe medical trauma cases, with one eye clouded by a dense cataract. The appearance was shockingly nightmarish. Lee didn't have to do much in the acting stakes, but his creature was certainly memorable, and just one of the many reasons why the BBFC were outraged and the critics filled with reactionary disgust and ire. What planted wild hairs up their asses was the following. The reveal of the creature's face. He tears off his bandages in a crash zoom to a close-up. Terrific scene that apparently gave some a fit of the vapours. Close-up of a pair of severed hands. Eyeballs, up close and personal. A brain in a jar, then in a dish. The callous murder of an elderly professor. The infamous severed head scene. The original has been lost for all time, apparently. In it, Frankenstein graphically removes the ravaged head of the highwayman and drops it into an acid bath where it sinks slowly, bubbling and dissolving away. For some reason, the BBFC were apoplectic. This was going too far, so it was cut. But what we got instead was even more gruesomely effective. A testament to the power of suggestion. We see Frankenstein's face as he strains soaring off the head. Once done, he wipes his bloodied hands on his lapel, leaving smears of dark viscera behind. Then we see him manhandle the head wrapped in cloth to the acid bath and manoeuvre it gently in. What we don't see is left to our imagination. Excellent. Much the same trick is used again with the removal of Bernstein's brain in the crypt, leaving the audience to fill in the visual blanks. The one that really got everyone hot under the collar was Paul shotgunning the creature in the face. The graphic blood splatter, gore pouring between Chris Lee's fingers as he falls to his knees and slowly collapses. How the BBFC allowed it to remain in is a mystery, but somehow they did. There was much bumping of gums and grinding of teeth surrounding Frankenstein's sexual relationship with the maid, Justine. Many felt it seriously morally inappropriate, especially of pregnancy, and Frankenstein's shocking way of dealing with the situation. You know, letting the creature kill both her and her unborn child. Well, why pay for a termination when you've got a reanimated patchwork murderer to hand? But then, Vic only has her word for it that she's pregnant. She might not have been, just saying it as emotional blackmail. What, that's an outrageous allegation, you sexist, misogynist pig? Hey, come on, just putting it out there. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. Women never lie about such things? Oh, okay then. The morally superior elite didn't much care for the killing of the blind man and his grandson either. The murders are not shown taking place off camera, but you know, it was a reprehensible way to treat two fictional vulnerable individuals in a fictional movie based on a fiction. I think that's enough. If Hammer had removed all the stuff that drew criticism and complaints, the runtime would have been about 3 minutes in total. Intro music and credits are still of an Alp, outro music and credits. Wouldn't have been much of a film, would it? The Curse of Frankenstein was something of a trailblazer. Luminaries such as Martin Scorsese and Tim Burton cite it as a major influence on their work. It let the genie out of the bottle, ushered in a new era of artistic freedom, and not just in the horror fantasy genre either. Although it's a relic now, it still retains the power to shock and be provocative. It was and remains one of Hammer's very best, and I personally love it to death, then and now. Thank you most sincerely for your gracious time and attention. Please feel free to do whatever you choose to do next. Hit like, don't like, comment, subscribe, check out my early access Patreon thing, or even make a welcome financial contribution via the thanks button. Up next is whatever takes my fancy, I suppose. New year, new me, new start. Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Take care, pilgrims. Catch you later.